beginners to allow them to practice their straight stitching skills and their accuracy while sewing. It's not your simple how to sew a pillowcase. Instead, I went for a slightly different tactic, and I've chosen to create a simple sign or poster just like this one here, which will be a mixture of hand sewing techniques or embroidery techniques and your basic sewing machine stitches. We've provided a template that you can download for free, which has a number of words and even shapes for you to practice your skills on. And it's just a really nice little way to jazz up your home, but not too expensive to get into. So what sort of supplies will you need for this project? Well, for a starter, you're going to need your template files. And secondly, I have actually used a watercolor piece of cardboard. As you can see, it's slightly thicker than your standard piece of paper, so it's not as likely to wrinkle as easily. Next, you will need some fine scissors or embroidery scissors. These just make cutting threads a lot easier than your standard fabric scissors. You'll also need some thread. Now you can use your standard crochet thread, which is a bit thicker than embroidery thread, or you can use some embroidery thread, and I will show you a cool trick on how to use sewing machine thread if you don't want to spend that extra money. Finally, you will need to use a hand needle, such as this one here. This one is actually an embroidery needle, which is a slightly bigger eye of the needle, which you'll find probably a lot easier to use than your standard sewing needle. And I do encourage you to pick up at least one of these. You've just printed off your standard A4 paper that you want to practice your projects on. Now, this is fine to practice your general stitching. However, if you want to create the embroidery project that we're going to be doing for this class, your standard A4 paper is a bit too flimsy and will wrinkle and crease far too easily. It's very easy to create something a little bit more substantial. So as you can see in this picture, I've simply taken a dark lead pencil and I've coloured the back in. Now this is something that I hopefully won't need to explain to you, because we've all done this as children. So give it to your child if you have one, so that they can help you out even. Next, you want to place that paper with the backing over something a little bit more substantial. So I've placed it over some watercolor paper. Now this is your standard office supply watercolor paper. It's just a bit thicker and will hold better when we start embroidering it. Now if you want to actually sew this onto fabric, please go ahead. You may want to consider interfacing your fabric first on the back side, and you can also eventually frame your fabric as well. Now for this project, I've removed my bobbin thread and my actual sewing machine thread. I don't want to actually be sewing the thread down. I want to be creating even spaced holes with the sewing machine. Also, you may find, depending on the size of the fabric or the cardboard you're using, that you can't fit certain edges in. So you could either choose to carefully roll your paper this way, but because we're not sewing with sewing machine thread and just using the needle to create the spaces, you can always turn it to find the best way for it to fit, as the direction of the sewing does not matter for this project. It is just the sewing along those lines accurately. Alright, to do this project is really quite simple. What you want to do is lower your needle right into the very point of any letter or shape. Lower your presser foot and just very slowly just stitch forward. Your sewing machine will make some holes into the paper. So what happens if you don't have crochet thread or embroidery thread? Well, you can use your standard sewing machine thread, such as this one here. It's a bright blue, doesn't necessarily show up great on this background, I'm sorry for that. With an embroidery thread needle, you can use your standard hand sewing needle, however it will be a little bit more fiddly. But what you want to do is, instead of using a singular strand of this sewing machine thread, what you should do is double it up. So join the two tail ends like that and double it up so it's a much thicker thread like this. Then you want to thread your needle. And I'm sorry if this is not in focus or if I'm blocking the view on camera for this. I often find threading needles this way difficult. So you thread your needle, just as that, and then you want to double up that thread again. So you've actually got 4 strands of your sewing thread in one go. And this will produce a really nice thick thread which will be very visible in your project, and it's great for beginners who don't want to go out and buy extra threads, extra crochet thread or embroidery thread that they'll probably never use. So the rest of the project is really quite simple. With the holes that you have in your cardboard piece, as you can tell I'm not necessarily that neat for this project, you want to turn it over and insert your needle through so that it can be seen on the other side, and pull it through and pull the thread of your string, the tail, until there's still a bit there that can be easily held down with your finger, and simply crisscross the design and pull the thread through, and just keep repeating that until you get all the centers of the words or the letters or even the shapes filled, and you'll have a lovely project. If you've liked this video, can you please click the like button below? If you have any comments, feel free to leave comments. And finally, if you're new here, don't forget to click the subscribe button.